You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and this will be a bit of a rougher and less polished episode of Talking Images. Michael Snow passed away this Thursday, January 5th, 2023. He was 94, and we are recording this episode as a special tribute on Sunday the 8th. Hopefully to be able to publish already today. Luckily, I have it on good authority, at least from Man's Films, that less, shall we say, even audio and even glitches are not a particular concern, perhaps even a badge of honor. So, should there be any sounds that deviates from conventional quality standards, I believe we have the approval of Mr. Snow himself. For anyone coming into this episode blind, Michael Snow is one of the most respected and important experimental filmmakers in cinema history, and a part of the structural film movement, designing films by fixed patterns, such as his most acclaimed films, Wavelength and Région Centrale. The former taking place in a single room as a static camera zooms towards an unknown point, and in the latter, a robotic camera on top of a mechanical arm captures the Canadian wilderness based on a program written by Snow himself. This was, by the way, in the early 70s. In this episode, we'll talk about why Michael Snow is an important artist, just how successful we think his experiments truly are, if they're endurance tests mainly notable for the theory and ideas rather than the films themselves, or if they can actually be enjoyed, as these films can be pretty damn divisive. Along the way, we'll discuss Snow's biggest films. As part of the reason why this episode is about 3 days late is that we've actually been watching and rewatching these films. And I think with no further ado, we can just break into that conversation and bring in my co-host Saul, as well. I'm a bit more on the fence towards Mr. Snow's films. He is probably the biggest Michael Snow fan I know, though perhaps because I just don't know that many Michael Snow fans. So, Saul, maybe you can illuminate our listeners a little. How big of a Snow fan would you say that you are?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'd say that I am a pretty big, massive Michael Snow fan, but I'm actually not the most massive on the forum. If the user 45-minute Zoom is listening to this, or Robert as he goes by on Letterboxd, is actually a much bigger Michael Snow film fan than I am. I think.
I can tell from his username. Yeah, complete
title. Yeah, named after Wavelength. The Wavelength is in his all-time top 4 films. I like that one a lot, but not quite as much of that. And I think he's seen all of his features, including the harder to find ones, whereas I've still got a couple of Michael Snow films that I haven't been able to track down. So I wouldn't say I'm the biggest one, but definitely he's a director who speaks a lot to me. Out of all the experimental filmmakers out there, you think about like the Framptons and the Brackages, for me, Michael Snow is the peak one, the best one. And for me, why he's the best experimental filmmaker is he doesn't just make experimental films just to play around with, manipulate things. They come with a constant sense of playfulness. I mean, it was a bit, I don't want to say disheartening, maybe not surprising, but it made me go, when you actually said in the intro that his films can be endurance tests, because I don't really feel they are. I mean, La Région Centrale, okay, I do get it, that one's 3 hours and that's quite repetitive, and that's one of the only 2 films of his that I haven't rewatched, so I can get it with that one. But his other films to me are just so dynamic. I mean, even that 45-minute Zoom film, it's not a 45-minute Zoom. It's just made to look like a 45-minute Zoom, and there's all these different things you pick up along the way about how things have been manipulated. And look, there's just no director for me other than Michael Snow, which is just so absolutely playful when it comes to experimenting with film form and challenging us in terms of what we see and what we see film as. Because film is, of course, 24, 25 frames per second, and he's somebody who constantly challenges us to see that, about how things are constructed and put together. And most of his films actually even have a narrative in this. There's a bit of a narrative going along in there, but along the way is constantly making us think about how everything has been constructed. And his best films are just, absolutely hilarious. Also, it's not just playful, but like So Is This is one of the funniest films I've ever seen. And it's not even listed as a comedy on IMDb.
Yeah, you're completely right, and you actually answered my next question. I was going to try to ask you to sell Michael Snow's films. I think you just did that. I don't think a lot of people think about Michael Snow and comedy, and maybe because they've only seen, for instance, Wavelength and La Région Centrale, and just left it at that. Just to extend it a little bit, and what is it that you would say it is that makes Michael Snow's films so funny?
That's a bit of a hard question to answer. I guess it's the way that he puts different bits and pieces together, and he sort of does it in ways that you're not quite expecting it. I mean, the whole idea of So Is This is it's, one word at a time, but even with the one word at a time, he's able to put surprise words in there. Or think about something like Corpus Callosum, which is his single greatest film, even though most people haven't seen it, unfortunately. It's just got so many different quirks, and then we've got different things like parts of the background come out and start walking around, and there's just, tons, there's just tons of different surprises along the way. And even things like back and forth or whatever, like the camera goes up and you suddenly see a face there. Think about like Presence in the final hour of it with some of the pans up and down, just seeing unexpected bits of XXX in there. There's just all these different things in there which you don't expect, and he sort of puts the unexpected in there, which makes it a bit more challenging. It's sort of funnier because you don't really see the jokes coming. I mean, lots of comedies you can watch and go, oh, I know what's going to happen. There's going to be a joke here and there. With Michael Snow films, it's much harder to predict unless you've seen the film before, which makes it funnier when those bits and pieces do come along.
And I just have to say that just part of the reason we've actually been discussing doing a Michael Snow podcast for a while is because I used to hate Wavelength, and I have never seen Corpus Callosum. So, not gonna. So Saul has been trying to push me towards those films, and while I'm still not sold on Wavelength, we'll talk about that very soon. I actually did love Corpus Callosum. I think that's a really hilarious film. So is pretty damn funny as well. I think that's a film almost anyone could enjoy. So I would say even for those people who stop after his two biggest films, there might actually be something for you further down the line. But before we just start diving into his films one by one, let's just talk a little bit about his... You can't hear me? Hello? Hello? Not this episode. Testing? Hello?
Testing. Can you hear me? It's going green now. Hello?
Testing.
Oh, okay, I can hear you now also. I don't know what happened. That was very strange. That was something straight out of Corpus Callosum.
Yes, this is... we can keep part of that in, maybe. just out of respect for the surprises that come along the way. So where did I fall out?
You're talking about how funny So Is This was, and you're talking about something a little bit after that, but you were talking about how funny the films were and how people stop after Wavelength and how that's so awful because Wavelength and the Central Region aren't even his best films.
Yeah, that I mean, not even by a long shot, even to an extent. But that's my personal preference, and I think that those two early films are obviously the most respected films. So I think it would be good to, before we dive into the individual films, talk about Michael Snow's place in the canon, because obviously he has a really large spot there. He is respected for a reason. Why do you think that he belongs there? Like beyond, personal taste, etc. What do you think it is that makes Michael Snow belong in the canon of key directors?
Well, I'm pretty much going to end up repeating myself, but just because of how much he challenges film form. I mean, he's one of those key directors who's, and I'm surprised you don't like his films more, because he's all about the artificiality. He constantly brings out how artificial and how constructed his films are. Constantly manipulating time, how long images last for in present, stretching out the frame, playing around with sound recording in Rameau's Nephew. I mean, he's constantly always challenging the way movies are constructed. And, I think he's the person who does the best job of that.
That's an interesting point, and I agree to a degree. I think that's what I love about parts of his films, and especially what I love about Corpus Callosum. And I think it's also interesting that there's a lot of directors who says, they are on record as being inspired by him that I love. I mean, Chantal Akerman says, Wavelength was a big inspiration to her. I love Chantal Akerman. Even Martin Scorsese says he was inspired by Michael Snow, which I can't quite see. I need to look up the context that was said, but like Peter Greenaway, clearly inspired. And there's also, like, my favorite director is Jean-Luc Godard. He does very similar things where he plays around with the medium and can drag out a sequence, play around with sound, etc. So that there might be some barriers left between me and Snow. And just for the record, I did rewatch Wavelength the day it was announced that he had died, and it did grow for me. I enjoyed it far more than I did the first time I saw it. And it's possible that, as I grow older, I will like his films even more. I think the big hang-up for me with the films is that they aren't that composed. As in, they're not traditionally visually beautiful. And that's not the key part for me. I can enjoy films very well that aren't, strikingly beautifully composed. But like there's something a little bit of just about the quality of the image and of the shots that I always found a little bit off-putting. Like again, I always thought in my head, like if say Godard had made Wavelength, there would have been a lot more color in that shot. And I can see you. I'll let you speak, Sean, because I can see that your reaction is a bit dumbfounded.
It's not so much dumbfounded, but it's just like, the point of the film is that it doesn't look pitch perfect, doesn't look...
Yeah, exactly. I know. I completely agree. So that's why I'm saying that, I can see that as part of the appeal. So, but I'm not there yet. I'm not there that I can appreciate that part of the appeal yet. So hopefully in due time. But I still really enjoy several of his films. I loved Corpus Callosum. So let's see. I mean, it's been well over a decade since I first saw Wavelength. It must be like 18 years ago maybe I first saw Wavelength. So I went from hating it to appreciating it, even liking it. Let's see in 15-20 years if I suddenly love all of Michael Snell's films, But on that note, let's actually dive into his first, I guess you could call it a feature. It's about 45 minutes. It's, of course, Wavelength. And this is the first, some people call it the Citizen Kane of experimental filmmaking. It's arguably one of the films people lift up as the most important experimental film of all time. Why do you think that is?
I think what's most effective about Wavelength is the fact that maybe not so many, but a lot of people or a few people sit down and view it and go, oh, that was just a 45-minute zoom to... Wait, can I spoil it?
You're allowed to spoil Wavelength, okay. So it's fine. It's fine.
So there's a lot of people who go down, people we call check whores on the ICM forum, who just want to get a check on a list or whatever, will sit down and watch it, or somebody who's following, maybe they shoot pictures, not a check whore, but somebody just wants to complete the they shoot pictures list, will sit down and watch and go, oh, there was just a 45-minute zoom to a picture of a wave. But what's so great
that's a spoiler. No, that's a spoiler, so.
No, you said I could spoil it.
Yes, it's okay. It's okay.
Now, where was I? Look, that isn't a spoiler, really, because that's not really sort of what the film is about. I mean, the whole idea is that it's that illusion of a zoom. And the fact, I think, why so many filmmakers are inspired by it is because they're seeing all of these regular viewers going, that's a 45-minute zoom, when it actually isn't. Michael Snow's just been incredibly clever with it and played around with it. It's got the illusion of being a 45-minute zoom. Now, he constantly, changes the colors. He's inversing the colors. The shots are dissolved together. and there's lots of editing in there, and it completely blurs the sense of time. So even though it is technically, if you look at when you start watching on YouTube, when you finish watching it, it is 44 minutes or whatever it is. It actually isn't, because the thing is taking place along a longer period of time, and yet it's creating this illusion of being, 45 minutes. So, I sort of liken it to, Arrival on the train, maybe, where it sort of like seems like the train's coming out towards you. And if you saw that film back in, circa 1900, you might have run out the room. It's the same idea of the illusion. I've here got this illusion that it's a 45-minute zoom. You got all these people going, oh, it's just a zoom, but it actually isn't. It's so much more dynamic than that. And then, of course, I guess the other thing which I really like about it, but that's maybe a personal thing, is just the story behind it. I mean, the film's actually a bit of a murder mystery. They've got this thriller, they've got a resident who's murdered, and, nobody comes to investigate the murder, and his body just remains there. And we have no idea how long it remains there. Is it for 45 minutes? Because the film is 45 minutes long. Is it happening over days or weeks or months or hours? We have absolutely no idea how long it's happening, because Michael Snow is putting all these different editing, all of these different transitions in there. So, yeah, I just find it incredibly dynamic. And the only thing which I don't like about it that much is definitely the varying pitch sound design. I mean, that's why it'd only be my fourth favourite Snow film rather than being the top one up there. But, yeah, in terms of what it does, I can definitely understand why this one's such an influential film.
I can't believe that the pitch sound is what you're criticizing, because that's something that goes through so many of his films. That idea of the static noise in the background, and it kind of just lulls you into a bit of a complacency with it. I completely agree. I really enjoy the way. The choppiness of it. It is really interesting, the way you can see that there's all of these potential time jumps and you don't necessarily know what's going on. You can see the changes in colors. It changes focus. Sometimes the streets above are, completely just light coming in. Sometimes the room becomes completely black, and you can see the outside of the outside perfectly. And you just have all of these noises. It's that part's really interesting, and the zooming on the wave is a really fun joke in a way. It's called Wavelength, and it ends up on a wave. That's one of the first indications, perhaps, that Michael Snow is a little bit of a experimental comedian. I read Jonathan Rosenbaum's review on Wavelength, which was republished after Michael Snow's death, and he described it as a mystery film, and you might agree there too. But part of the mysteries, he said, and one of the things that excited him was that he didn't know where the zoom was going, and he talked about how he was sitting there trying to find all of these clues that what elements of the frame was important, that there were these clues along the way that were misdirections. I guess the person coming in dying, falling on the floor, the people carrying in the shelves. There's all these little things happening, but none of that's really, I guess, relevant to where the zoom is going. So that was one of the things that really interested Jonathan Rosenbaum. So I thought that was a really interesting take.
Yeah, I haven't read that before, but I absolutely love that take from Rosenbaum, because I can definitely see that when a camera does start to zoom in any film, not just a Michael Snow film, unless it's a very quick zoom, you actually have no idea where it's going to be zooming into or what's actually going to end up landing on. So I do love that. And I do agree it's a mystery film. I guess, yeah, beyond the murder or whatever, there's just a lot of mystery in terms of, what is actually going on. I think when we had Ben on and we're doing the found footage podcast, he described it as a found footage film, and it does have a bit of that vibe in there. So is there this camera that's been set up in the room, and then what is it actually doing there? Was it put there to capture the murder? What's happening to it? Yeah, it is incredibly interesting. And the other thing I just mentioned is that I do feel the film is sort of about death. I mean, one of the things that I did write about it when I wrote a review on it a couple of years ago when I rewatched it is that death is death, regardless of whether he's discovered 1 minute later or 1 week later. So it's sort of the idea that Snow's manipulating time to sort of show us that he is, he's died. There's a dead body there. We could try and suppose, when he's been discovered. But either way, he's dead. That part of it's final in there. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm probably just rambling on a bit at the moment, but it is a film that I find incredibly interesting, and one that I guess, I guess I wouldn't say disappointing, but, I guess I feel a bit like the filmmakers when somebody describes a 45-minute Zoom, just going like, you have no idea what you're missing out on.
Yeah, that's completely true. I mean, like you said, part of it is looped. You can see like a ghost of some of the key events, which are just like played back over the frame. You have all of this play with light, and it cuts as well. Like there's some points you can kind of see that, the amount of windows, for instance, you see are not the same amount after the light changes. You have all of these little things. So if you're not on your toes, you're missing a lot. And it's a very visual experience, even though it's so raw in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's great early experiment by Michael Snow, and I think it's easy to see why a lot of people, especially if they're not paying attention to it, would be dismissive of it as a 45-minute Zoom. It's clearly not that, though I can also see people noticing everything in it and, still not being quite for them, especially if they, would prefer a more traditional murder plot. But to move on to a similar experiment that has even less of a plot, made 2 years later, Back and Forth, which is very literally the camera moving back and forth. And here I was actually captivated very early. You're outside of a school. You see, you just see Michael Snow setting up what's going to happen. As in, he moves the camera back and forth, left, right, and then we're inside of the classroom, and the pattern repeats itself: left, right, and at some point, things start to happen. Things change, and at some point, he actually changes the formula completely too. But we can get into that later. But it's just such a basic idea, and I think this is one of those things that we tie back to why Michael Snow is a key artist too. Like it's a basic idea, but no one else were doing this. Like what happens with our perspective when you just apply this technique and then you start cutting it up and adding things and surprising us a little bit. And I think this is one you appreciate even more than Wavelength, right, Sol?
Yeah, no, I'd say Back and Forth, or I don't know how you want to pronounce it using symbols, so just call it Yeah, I know, like it broke the iCheck movie system, and it was an iCheck movies because I had the greater than less than sign in there. They couldn't have links to it, so
yes.
Less than dash greater than no. So Back and Forth. Yeah, look, for me, it's Michael Snow's third best film, so I would rate it above Wavelength. I guess what I like about it so much is the false sense of security that Michael Snow gives us, and then entirely breaks, because you've got an entire first 11 minutes where it's just rocking back and forth, to and fro, but then suddenly different things start to happen. People pop up randomly, the speed changes, the directions change, we start to see strange things in the windows. Or do we? So there's sort of a bit of an illusion in there. I was sort of watching and going, am I imagining this? Is this really there? You're actually not sure because the camera never stays still. It's constantly rocking back and forth. Anything that you see is entirely blurry. So it's actually even a bit scary, I guess, that you can maybe just call it a Michael Snow horror film. It is a bit freaky. Yeah, I know.
Yes, I mean, there's that moment when suddenly the room is a lot darker and it pans in and there's like just this shadow standing there, and it's very ominous. Or sitting there, rather.
No, definitely. So, I mean, I know that might sound a bit overreaching, but, it is incredibly unsettling. And all it is done to achieve that is by having the rocking back and forth for 11 minutes, making us so secure in what's happening. And then everything beyond that, like, totally shutters our world, which is something which Michael Snow can do so well and is so capable of. And the other thing I think I'd mention before I let you chime in yourself, Chris, is what I noticed the second time around when I was watching it is the film's set in a classroom. And the thing that came to mind when I was rewatching is that it sort of like feels like you're in the classroom zoning out. You know, if it's not a very interesting lesson, you're going to get distracted by different things around the room and noticing things around the window. So I actually sort of felt a bit like a student in the classroom there in a repetitive lesson, getting distracted by things that are less repetitive than what I'm actually learning about.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. And I mean, I can just say first of all that when we have about 10, 11 minutes of just the camera moving back and forth, I can see why a lot of people might start checking out a little. But the constant movement does involve you. And one of the things that really impressed me on the rewatch, because it's been such a long time that I saw this film, was that what I remembered kind of was that, he would pan away and you pan back, and it would be like a cut or something, and someone would suddenly be there. But that's not really the film. Like, most of the time he cuts on action, so the camera will actually be moving and you'll be seeing the camera move as people pop into the shot. So it won't just pan to someone being there. People will just be walking, like you just be a sharp cut at the exact same point and someone will be there walking. And that's just struck me as really impressive. And the camera moves so fast as well that it's just like a blink of an eye. Suddenly something is there. And this kind of editing just keeps happening. And it's a really unique effect. Once again, I guess I'll just show off my semi-Philistine nature a little bit in that I would honestly have preferred it if it wasn't that blurry, and I was a little bit frustrated by, how there's clearly shot at different times of the day with different lights. I mean, that's probably part of the effect he's creating as well. One of those things I'll appreciate more if I see it again, like you said, in 15, 20 years. But that part of it, like the fact that, it doesn't always look like it's a continuous back and forth. You can see that things are shot at different points of the day and then edited together due to the light coming in. Is that an advantage for you or a negative?
Oh, look, for me, it's a bit of a plus. I mean, I don't know if listeners will be able to hear it, but I did audibly sigh when Chris complained about it being so blurry, because for me, that's the very point of the film, that you're not able to focus on anything. You've just got the rocking back and forth and other things happening in front of the camera. And I guess that's a technique which Snow sort of used a bit throughout his other films. I mean, we'll get to that a little bit with La Région Centrale and with Presence. He's sort of got that in there also, that he doesn't like us to fixate on different things. I mean, even 45-minute zoom, even Wavelength, the supposed 45-minute zoom film or whatever, isn't just one static shot. And I think, Snow just absolutely loves movement, or loved movement. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. But yeah, it's just the blurriness for me, it makes the film or whatever, that you want to be able to concentrate and see who's popped up at the window. You want to be able to see who's sat in the classroom, but you can't see because the camera keeps going back and forth and back and forth. So yeah, to me, it actually really makes the film.
Yeah, that's a really good defense. And I think that part actually is an advantage as well, the blurriness. I was talking more of the transition of time, but I can see that too. And listen, I like the film, and I like the film far more this time than the first time. So I'm on the right path with back and forth. Moving to his second biggest film, La Région Centrale, or Centrale, which is probably one of the most singular films ever made. It's the second film, the only other film to Wavelength that tends to show up at the top of just a lot of key lists. It's on the extended Sight and Sound list from 2012. It's obviously high, it's in the top 600, I believe, of They Should Pictures, Don't They? It's a film that a lot of people respect a lot. And it's really unique in that, you have a robotic arm, you have a robot with a camera on it, and Michael Snow wrote the program for it. This is again 1971 or even earlier when this was actually done. And it just moves in specific patterns. It spins around. It's essentially like I think the way some people have been describing this film, especially many of the fans, is that it's like an an alien planet sent a drone or a robot to investigate Earth, and this is the kind of images they would, receive back. That's what some people say. But you just have these very inhuman shots, I guess. It is like Earth captured in a way that no one else really has before. And even though, like I said, it is 3 hours, it's the only film I did not rewatch for this episode of the ones we'll be discussing. It's a film I really struggled with the first time. I can see myself enjoying it more now for sure. What is it you like the most about La Région Centrale?
Okay, so Région Centrale is the only snow film that I've seen more than 5 years ago that I haven't rewatched. So, I mean, I haven't rewatched Rameau's Nephew or Presence yet, but I only saw Presence yesterday. So, yeah. So, in terms of the ones that I saw at the beginning of my film journey, I've seen all those snow films twice, except for La Région Centrale. So, for me, it is his weakest film, but not so much due to the length, because obviously Rameau's Nephew is much longer. I think it's like an hour and a half longer or something. But it's just that I guess I find La Région Centrale less playful. And like I said at the start, playfulness is what I like the most about Snow's work. But in terms of what I like about it, because you didn't ask for the positives, I've just gone immediately to the negatives, which I shouldn't. Although I'm sort of like tempted to, because people go like, oh, I've seen Wavelength, I've seen La Région Centrale, I don't want to see anything else from Snow. I go to myself, oh my God, you know what you're missing out on. So I tend to sort of get a bit more negative on La Région Centrale. But look, I did think it was a good film when I saw it, even if I didn't think it's quite as high up there with his other films. I just want to go back to my review from a few years ago, because that's probably where I'm going to say it most accurately. So what I wrote at the time is, using a camera especially built for the film, the shots are far from ordinary and are deliberately disorientating to the point that one loses track of what is up and what is down. The camera spins itself in both horizontal and vertical axes. Then there's nighttime footage in which snow intentionally blurs the line between the sky and the ground, and there's also subtle changes of speed. So I guess for me, it's the losing track of what's up and down, which you get a little bit of that in Presence also, plus also blurring what's the sky and what's the ground. That's a very Snow thing to do. And also the change speeding it, but throughout most of Snow's career, the things that he's doing is constantly playing around with frame rates, especially things like So Is This, how long are those things on screen for? So there is a lot going on in La Région Centrale. I guess just overall, I didn't quite find it as playful and as amusing as the films which I consider to be Michael Snow's best.
Yeah, and I guess that's the experiment as well, because, there's not a lot of, places where he could insert jokes into this. Like you said, he blurs the line between the sky and the ground. There's obviously we see shots that are upside down, etc. So there's playfulness there, but it's a film that's really just captured by this arm and then played around with and edited by Snow later. But it doesn't have the same degree of agency from Snow as, for instance, So Is This or Presence, etc. has. So we will get into the or the next film coming up, which is I'm going to say the full title: Rameau's Nephew by Diderot, Thanks to Dennis Young in parentheses by Wilma Schoen. And in the film itself, this title keeps expanding. He explains that it's also based on the Cameron, it's based on the Bhagavad Gita. And you have this man with a bit of a stutter reading all of this. Almost a little bit like a prequel to or first version of So Is This, in a way, with like one word popping up at a time, which seeing this after So Is This made me laugh a bit. I think this is also a film you appreciate far more than me, though here there's some segments I absolutely love. Especially this, I think it's the third, I'm calling them segments, because essentially the way the film is made up is that it's almost like experimental sketch comedy, but some of the sketches are 40-50 minutes. where you have like there's this one on the plane, for instance, where you just have these people having a conversation, but most of their words are chopped off, so they'll be starting a sentence but it's never finished, or they will say things that doesn't quite intersect. At one point Snow randomly shows up himself playing a trumpet. They just say random things. Some of them are jokes. At some point, Michael Snow himself just off-screen instructs them on what to say. So he'll say what they say, and then they will say them. The camera moves in various directions. Sometimes they're up and down, and it cuts so frequently. It's just like a few seconds almost per piece of film stock, and then it cuts again, and it's really funny. There's one at the almost the very beginning with Jonas Mekas, where there's a voice that speaks from inanimate objects, and they're trying to figure out where it's coming from, and it's just really playful. Some of the, if you will, again, sketches aren't that fun. Like there's some that are a bit more similar to, I guess you could say, Wavelength or Back and Forth, that revisit some of those ideas that are more technical that I didn't connect with that much this time. But these, again, I'm going to call them sketches, are really all over the place. You might not enjoy one, but the next one could be really fun or really enjoyable, do something you really connect with. So it's obviously a mega work. It's 4 hours and 15 minutes long. What are your key takeaways from Rameau's Nephew?
Oh, wow. You've sold that one really well, Chris. I'm not even sure I've got much to add to that. I do want to say that even though it is over 4 hours long, it is an absolutely incredible film. When I first saw it, I actually described it as Corpus Callosum for the 1970s, because it sort of felt like that with the grade scope that Snow's taking on. But of course, Corpus Callosum is mostly about visuals, whereas for me, Rameau's Nephew is all about sound, and I guess the absurdity of using sound to communicate. So you've got all these characters speaking in gibberish, and sometimes the gibberish sounds like words, and then you go to say, actually, no, it's just gibberish, it's not actually words. The airplane sequence that you described, yeah, that one's absolutely amazing. The part with that piece of cheese, is that talking? Is something else talking? So it's all about the fact that we live in this world where we use sound, and sound is used as a form of communication, and yet maybe that's not the most logical way to communicate. So it's sort of poking fun at the ridiculousness of it, the absurdity of it. I think the title is absolutely perfect. The fact that it's impossible to pronounce. I think the narrator, from memory, has trouble pronouncing the very long credits in the film also. So a lot of it's about pronunciation. The fact you need to be able to pronunciate words to be able to communicate, but, should you be able to? And I think the title just does an amazing job of just showing, how complex language is, especially when you want to connote, when you want to show ownership in something, you have to put something after something, something before something in brackets, and the title just does an amazing job of that. So, I don't think I really have much to add beyond that. The only thing which I'd put out as a recommendation for anybody who hasn't thought about diving into it is that the film was long unavailable on home video or on streaming services, and then Mubi dug it up in January or February 2021, and I watched it, and a bunch of other people, Snow fans, watched it, and we actually managed to get it towards the very top of the doubling the Canon, which was only 2 months later. So made a big impression on me and a lot of other people there. It's definitely one of those key experimental films. And the 4 hours, 15 minutes doesn't feel like 4 hours, 15 minutes. It's not anywhere near as repetitive as the Région Centrale, and it's definitely one of his most dynamic and challenging films.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I felt like, I had to get to it now as well, because it's in the top 10 of the Doubling the Canon top 1000, which is like a supplement to the They Shoot Pictures Dante list, which looks at the films that have not been included there. And that's just really thoroughly impressive, and I can see why this film, is awe-inspiring. I think it's funny to note that Michael Snow actually, he voted in the Sight and Sound poll. He voted for 3 of his own films in the poll, and this was one of the films he selected. So he's clearly trying to, he was clearly trying to ride the wave of seeing, like, can I get this on the list or the extended list, or see what happens.
Yeah, no, that's a great point that Snow actually liked the film that much. I mean, when I saw his battle, I was a bit disappointed that he had, Wavelength and La Région Centrale in there, but no Corpus Callosum, or So Is This. But, I guess he's just going with this to be most acclaimed. And this other one, which I think there's been a resurgence of comments. So it's not just, movie unearthing it, but, people commenting on movie, people logging it on Letterboxd. I think there's been quite a flurry of activity for Rameau's Nephew, since it was released by Mubi just over 2 years ago.
And to move on to another film that has some similarities with Corpus Callosum, and a film which I'm a little bit split on, because I actually really loved the first 20 to 30 minutes, but after that, it once again went into territory where I'm enjoying what I'm seeing, but I'm not fully absorbed, and that is 1981's Presence. I can probably let you present it, so, but I'll just say that the opening of this film is probably one of the most interesting ones I've seen in the history of cinema, because he opens it with a scene completely compressed. You just have this little ray of light, and in the middle we kind of see like outlines of the colors of what's in the picture. It's just completely smashed together. Like it's this one thin vertical line, and then it slowly starts to expand, and you still can't see what it is. And at another point, he compresses it to a horizontal line as well, and you can see the image completely changing, and you see other things in there than what's actually there. You start looking almost like a landscape. So I think that's one of the most clever pieces of experimental cinema I have seen, and it's so truly inspired.
Yeah, the opening of Presence, when I sat down and watched it last night, I was going, this is possibly, Michael Snow's single best film, because that beginning is absolutely awesome. The way you've got like that small slit, which like slowly comes out, and then it sort of like compresses down horizontally. And then the segment which follows that there, where you sort of have this film set that starts completely collapsing in on itself, is just amazing, because
it is.
Yeah, it just mirrors everything which he was doing with the film. So with the film stock itself, with the film print, he's stretching that out and collapsing it down. And then with the film set, he ends up doing the exact same thing. So I absolutely love that. And I love the way the camera tracked up and down during that first half hour. It reminded me of Tu Vas Bien, the Jean-Luc Godard film, but even things like Jerry Lewis's The Ladies' Man have done things like that, like an open dollhouse thing with the camera going up and down. So yeah, that was absolutely amazing. The set's collapsing in itself, it was reminding me of like Jacques Tati and Playtime, where, Mr. Hulot ends up destroying some of the sets, they end up collapsing, and it gave me really strong vibes of that. Now, that's only 30 minutes of the film. The final hour of the film is definitely the most divisive. I was looking at Letterboxd comments afterwards, lots of comments to the same effect. So, Christian, not alone with that. And personally, I was disappointed at first with the final hour of the film, after that having such that dynamic star. But the second hour is, the final hour is actually quite interesting, because what it consists of is a whole lot of horizontal and vertical pans set outside, so inside the set, but in outdoor sets, if you like, that are spliced together at the sound of a drum beat. And that might not sound too interesting, but in true form for Michael Snow, there's no predictability to it. So some shots are vertical, then others be horizontal pans. Some of the shots last for a few seconds, some last for not a very long time, but a large number of seconds. So it reminded me a lot of So Is This, which of course came later, with how long different shots are lasting for and the different speeds they are, and also the direction in which the film was moving and the camera's moving. And like I mentioned earlier on in the intro with it, this is part of Snow being playful. Some of the shots we see in there, suddenly it's panning up or down. We see a face staring at the camera. It's just like so alarmed. It's just like the shot in back and forth. We see the person at the window and you go, whoa, there's something else happening. So just all these unexpected things pop up. And to me, it felt very snow-like. I guess for my liking, I would have maybe liked a bit of a stronger link between the first half hour and the second hour, because it feels like they could be separate films. But then again, if you're looking at it from a film set point of view, first off, he's collapsing the actual film itself by stretching it out and making it narrower. Then he's collapsing the set, and then he's going outdoors. And of course, outdoors you can't collapse an outdoor set, because unless you get like all these earth digging equipments and like dig up the ground and everything. But he's doing as much as he can to collapse what's happening outdoors. So all that's quite interesting. And I don't know, Chris, if you've got any theories about the title. The title, of course, has got, three different sorts of meanings. It could be Michael Snow Presents, and that Michael Snow presents this film. It could be presents, as in like a present that you give to somebody, so like a gift, or it could be present like the present tense. And I've actually read quite a few interpretations where people are talking about it being the present, and being the present inside the room and the present outside. And by manipulating all these shots together, he's creating this sort of fake sense of what the present is. So definitely a very interesting title there. And I know films aren't all about the title, but, it's one of those films. Like, there was also a film about 7 years ago called The Fit, which has three different meanings. And I just love films like that where you can interpret the title in 3 or 4 different ways.
I actually didn't think about the third meaning you were referring to there, with this being various presents as various parts of the present time. That's a really that's a really interesting idea, and that could work, especially for the last hour. Yeah, I was also unsure if it was Michael Snow Presents or Presents. I guess the small shots could be the presents. I don't know, or pieces of present time. I'm not sure. I mean, I will just say that, like you, I think that they could have been separate films. I would probably have appreciated both more in that case, because for the last hour, I was almost expecting something else to happen. I was expecting this to be like, say, maybe for half an hour, and then we got a third act, or not as Snow does acts, but I thought maybe there was something similar to Rameau's Nephew going on, where we kind of get different visual ideas, but it's just two. And the first one, like I said, it's so clever. You have them kind of walking on the stage that's moving. You have him walking on the stage that's moving, and you see them struggling with their balance. You don't really know what's going on. Like, why can't they walk? As soon as you see the walls shaking, it's like you hear it kind of stopping, and things are slamming, and then things completely change again. And that's just so clever and dynamic. And the last hour, it's interesting, especially because it's not just random shots. There are pieces of the same story, if you will, that are cut together. So you get more of the same visual. Like, you have a hunting trip where you see a kill. You have a parachuter coming down. There's various things that keeps being revisited, and then yes, there are those kind of sneak things to surprise you, and maybe check if you're still awake in there as well. And I thought it was interesting the way it cuts, with that cutting with that sound, but I just didn't think those connections were that interesting to me. It's enjoyable. It's like you said, it's a lot of what Michael Snow tends to do. I also thought about back and forth a lot during it, but it's just like you had the first part, which is such a unique and cool concept with so much unique playfulness, and then you get into something, I'm not going to say conventional, but just a little bit more of what he had been doing before. But yeah, it's still a very good film. And one I would definitely recommend, if only particularly just for that first half hour, because that's something I think everyone should see.
So you've just mentioned something, Chris, which has actually put the film in high esteem, because you talked about the fact that with all the different shots in the final hour, they actually do come from different parts of the same story. And what that made me think about is you've sort of got, Wavelength, where you've got all these different things put together, and we sort of make it seem like it's one single 45-minute zoom. And then you've got sort of like the opposite of that in Presence, where you've got all of these sort of bits and pieces, and because they've been cut and spliced together, we can't actually see what the timeline is. And so I was sort of thinking about that and going, well, that's actually quite interesting. Maybe those are the presents there. So he's got maybe the present of the person descending with the parachute, the present of the surgery taking place, the present of the part with the porn star in there, and all those presents being put together but spliced up. It's sort of like an interesting film. Like, I wanted to actually take it out and manipulate it and put it back in order. Because I know it's what some Christopher Nolan fans did with Memento. They took it out and they re-edited it and put it back in order. I know people have done that with Pulp Fiction also. And I guess Presents could be the next film if somebody tries to do that.
Your next solo YouTube project, I guess. But for something like you mentioned, for a film that kind of plays on with this idea of keeping visuals on screen for various lengths of time, but with the exception of them not really being, shall we say, something that's actually no, they have been filmed. We can move to So Is This from 1982. Which is filmed words. So Michael Snow wrote a script. And then he shot the words individually in different fonts, sizes, and he cut it together into a narrative comedy of sorts that only consists of white words on a black screen. So I think this is the one we talked about earlier. Like, this is his funniest film, and I'm actually going to go out on a bit of a stretch here and say that this is probably Snow's most not conventional, that's the wrong word, most accessible film. I think this is one that people who aren't even into experimental cinema or cinema at all could, sit down, watch, and if not love, just really enjoy, because there's just a lot of really straightforward, clear-cut comedy in this that's that can be pretty hilarious.
Yeah, I entirely agree that So Is This is Snow's most accessible film. I guess from my point of view, it's sort of the disappointment for me is that it's just one film, which is an unofficial check on iCheck Movies. So, because it's sort of the film which people who use that site aren't going to go out and watch because it's not on an official list, and yet it's the one which they're most likely to like because it does follow something which is, I guess, easier to follow. It's very dynamic. There's always something happening, so it's not like back and forth where you have to wait 11 minutes for something weird to happen. It's not like Wavelength, where if you're not paying attention, you don't realize that it's not a 45-minute Zoom. It's something where there's constantly something going on there. And it's just some of the hilarious things, that Snow asks us in there, does it seem, I don't remember what he uses, frightening? Is it frightening that this film's going to go on for so much longer? And he has like a warning, and he has the word warning on the screen for ages. Because what he's playing around with is not just, like you did mention, the font and the font size, but also how long everything lingers on screen for. So yeah, it's incredibly dynamic, and you wouldn't think that, words on the screen, you go, oh, yeah, what can you do with that? But in terms of the font, the color, how bright the white is, how long it lasts on there for, how short it's on there for, it all changes everything a lot. And he has some real big, it really pokes at film censorship with some of the things he puts in there. And I don't know how else I could sell it except just saying, it's so I've lost myself there. But look, it just is an incredibly funny film. There's a lot going on there, much more than you'd expect for a film which is just words on screen. And it is definitely one of the funniest films I've ever seen.
Well, I guess we can say that, it starts with saying very slowly, this is the title of this movie. And at one point a little bit later, it is continues, and it goes, so is this. And it continues. And at one point, after I think 10 minutes, he starts saying that, for taking a pause so that the latecomers can get adjusted. And then he starts talking about maybe we should do a bit of a recap, and he goes back to start explaining what happened in the first 10 minutes. He starts talking about why it took so long to make. He starts talking about, like you said, the Canadian Censorship Board starts sneaking in dirty words. And it's kind of like this just dynamic idea where he just kind of writes jokes for us, or writes amusing little words, like starts doing some meta comedy, like just what we should do. And like one point says like this movie is going to be very annoying for people who don't like having people read over their backs, which I guess doesn't work as well for a home viewing audience, but as in a cinema as this was originally shown, it's just a lot of really funny jokes about this. And then at one point he even starts talking about how, he doesn't actually want, his films to be for a niche audience, just did what he had at the time. And with this film, he's going to try to reach everyone, at least the people who speak English. And then a little bit later he says a French version will be coming as well. And it's very amusing. And I think that, anyone can really sit down with this. It's not, a film that people will probably say is pretentious. I think, people could throw those kind of critiques at him. This is just because it's jovial. It's charming. It's just him putting himself out there and playing around with words. And it's not something that you need to even think about to understand. Like, you can probably use, knowledge about film to talk about the length of the shots or how everything's put together. And just how, he also still uses film and photographs, etc., to maintain a degree of suspense and uncertainty. And at one point he just directly addresses it too. Like, he's like, he apologizes for not being able to please everyone's speed, and then he starts the same sentence in 4 different speeds so that everyone can get, the speed that they're comfortable reading with. So, it's one of those films that yes, it's an experimental film. I mean, he references other films that play with words as well, but I think it's like certainly a film unlike anything else I've seen, and one that definitely deserves more credit.
Well, you'd help get more credit, Chris, if you add it to your 500 under 400 list, and hopefully try and get it on there in the next update.
Yeah, I'm still considering if I liked it that much. It's possible it will go up there, but one film that I actually will put up there, and we actually need to jump 20 years ahead in time here to Corpus Callosum. But this is the film that I know you've been trying to sell me on for years. I mean, it's your favorite Snow, I believe, and the one you said, like, even if you didn't, love Wavelength, like, this is its most dynamic. This is, I think at the time you said it's its most funniest. I'm not sure if you said that at that point, because this is probably a little bit more funny, but it's a ride. It's creative. It's more fast paced. It's a bit, I guess you could say, it's like the first half hour of Presence, but it never really diverges away from that. It has these core ideas. And it's just so bloody playful, experimental with everything. Like you mentioned earlier in the intro, what we see as the walls suddenly start changing. You kind of start off with these people walking in this door with the director giving instructions to them to, like, now you're gonna walk a little bit faster, walk a little bit slower. They open the door, they close it. Suddenly we're inside of Corpus Callosum. That's the little paper that's written on the door. And then when we get inside, we essentially get to an office, and we just start spinning slowly over this office, and it's like a continual shot, because when you get to the wall and you go over the wall, we start from the beginning again, but things keep changing. Instructions are being added in, and you have things like everyone's suddenly being electrocuted. But like, what's so amusing with this film is that it's not just these tricks, it's the experience of those tricks, because after that effect, everyone falls to the floor, and the actors become themselves again, and they're kind of laughing about it, and they get more instructions on what to do. And that's the kind of, like, this is building on so is this, and just how meta it is in communicating directly with the audience. This is so much of a film about just the joy of making a film, the joy of special effects, the joy of just joking around, and it just takes the best things of what I've enjoyed with Snow from the beginning, and just works them all into almost like this magnum opus. And unlike Région Centrale and Rameau's Nephew, This is just about 90 minutes long, and it actually is tagged as a comedy on IMDb. So if you're into, experimental cinema, art house cinema, but you didn't enjoy Wavelength, like we said earlier, it would be a shame to stop, because this is a film that I think is opens itself up to far bigger audiences. If not primarily art house audiences, it's just so much easier to just get into this film. Something is always happening. Something's always changing. What we're seeing on the screen changes. The actors suddenly changes and are different. It's just like all out crazy, joyous exercise of just what you can do with effects, computer effects in the early 2000s.
So you did describe Corpus Callosum as Michael Snow's magnum opus, and I would agree with that. I'm not sure the best way to sell the film. There's a couple of things I could say. One of the things I will say is I can only think of 2 films in my life where I watched it and the next day I wanted to tell somebody about it, but I couldn't even begin to describe the film. So one of those is Ray's Ravens, or Cria Cuervos, the one with Anna Torrent in it from the 70s, and the other film was Corpus Callosum. So it was my first Michael Snow film. I happened to see it because I think I was either working through the 21st Century They Shoot Pictures list or the Rosenbaum list. I was walking through some list or whatever, and it was on. It wasn't very long. It was on YouTube, so I'm like, sure, I'm going to watch it. And yeah, just totally knocked my socks off. And I've rewatched it, and it's to the point where I think it's possibly the best film of this century. I'm not sure. It's definitely very high up there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay. Now that's a way of selling it. It's Saul's favorite film of the century.
Oh, well, yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, the century's only 23 years old.
Still. You can say best film of the zeros, and the people would still be a bit, dumbfounded and feel the need to, what is this film that, Saul thinks this would be the best of the decade, but this is the best of the last 23 years. That's, that says something.
Possibly, I don't know. The thing is that it's hard to rate alongside other films because it's not a traditional narrative. So look, I haven't rated it as highly as something like Get Out, which is, one of my favorite films from the century. So I don't know exactly, just because it's so hard to rate it because it's so different from everything else. But it's definitely one of those films that spring to mind when people talk about, best films of the 21st century. I sort of go, this is one of those challenging films that, is definitely high up there. What really appealed to me about it when I first watched it, and even upon rewatch, is that there is a narrative going along in there. So it's much easier for me to get into experimental cinema when there's a bit of a story going on, and there is a story going on here. For me, I guess it depends how you look at it, because you're describing them as being actors, giving them instructions. The way I sort of looked at it is about these high-rise office building workers who are being subjected to humiliating experiments that defy physics and human perception. So you've sort of got this evil corporation who wants to do all these crazy things to their workers to find out what their reactions are. So they're electrocuting them, different things are happening to them, different things are coming out of the wall. But I guess beyond that, it's just like Michael Snow completely turning on its head everything we think about films and, about special effects. And, there's one absolutely amazing part of the film where you've got somebody in a wheelchair who drives over the film that we're watching. So we think about the film as we think about the film as being, the fourth wall or whatever, and yet he's driving over the fourth wall. So not as even as we're looking into this environment, he's going on top of the environment. And just other things like the parts they've got posters melting off the walls or whatever, it's just incredibly challenging also. It totally destroys any notion you might bring as to what's actually inside the frame. We don't know what's inside the frame or what's been put there digitally, what's been manipulated. It totally speaks to what films are these days. That's, early 2000s, but, we're in 2023 now. You've got really advanced CGI there. You've got actors acting against green screens. You're not sure what's there and what's not really there. You've got Michael Snow already sort of, it's a bit of a prescient film or whatever, being able to see ahead of this and going, this is where films are going. These are the times you're living for videos. I mean, he was doing this all the way back in the 60s by trying to deconstruct a 45-minute zoom and trying to, make a pretend 45-minute zoom look like a real one. And he's sort of doing the same thing here in Corpus Callosum, which is, I guess, 35 years later, exactly 35 years later. He's doing the same thing, and they're looking at the way that the techniques that are available to him can sort of totally change our perception of what we're watching. So, yeah, I don't know if there's anything else I can say. A lot of it just feels like I'm just putting in, random compliments, best film of the century, film that I wanted to talk about but I couldn't describe. But, I sort of feel that way about this film. It's just a totally overwhelming filming experience. And like you said there, it's incredibly funny also.
Yeah, I think that anyone listening to that, if they're at all inclined towards experimental cinema, will have their interest piqued, because, like you say, it is such a unique film, even within Michael Snow's filmography. You can see there's so many ideas from his previous films that kind of work their way in here, but they're done in a way that's far more accessible as well. So if Maybe I think you told me once that this is the film. This was the film that you started with for Michael Snow. Maybe it's the film everyone actually should start with for Michael Snow, because it is his best film, and at least for me and for you. So I really hope that it gains momentum as time continues. It's already on TSPDT's best or most acclaimed films of the 21st century. So that's a great start. And let's see what happens now, really. And I think that's the 7 films we'll be that we were meant to be talking about today. Is there anything else you would like to mention, Saul? No surprise ending, no experimentation.
No, look, I guess I'm just going to be predictable or whatever and just recap what I said earlier. If you're somebody who's gone out there and decided I'm going to watch, the 1,000 Greatest Films, and you've seen Wavelength and you've seen Central Region, please don't give up there. You're doing yourself a massive disservice, especially if you're somebody who likes experimental cinema. And if you haven't begun with Michael Snow, then yeah, I'd say Corpus Callosum is definitely the right place to start. It's where I started from. And while it's not always great some of the director's best work, it is rewarding because you can sort of see the films that build up to it. So, Wavelength, when I first saw it, was a mild disappointment after this. Back and Forth was a mild disappointment after Corpus Callosum. But when I went back and rewatched those films, you sort of see those things that he was sort of building towards in Corpus Callosum. So, yeah, I mean, it depends the way you want to go at it. But, I'll say it's a pretty good place to start. I know if you start with Corpus Callosum, it's going to be a downhill road from there. But then it's not really like slanted downhill. It's like a slow, like gradual slope. Because none of his films, even Central Region, none of his films are bad films. They're all got the interesting things in there. But Corpus Callosum is definitely the most dynamic thing he's ever done. And yeah, it's one of the most dynamic films that have been made this century. One of the most dynamic films, I guess, about this century, what you can do with film these days.
And that's not a reason to watch Corpus Callosum. So, yeah, do give it a viewing if you're at all inclined that way. And with that, I guess we can close this highly experimental episode of our own and see how it comes out. Apologies again for any imperfections. And just as a reminder, we are still on our hiatus. Season 4 is, well, I guess this is the first episode of season 4, but we will be back in February on a regular bi-weekly schedule. Thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon.
You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.